I'm 82 years old, and the man who almost destroyed my life wasn't my enemy. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't someone I feared. He was my best friend. His name was Carmine. We grew up together in the same neighborhood. We were 12 years old when we first met. We ran through the same streets, shared the same dreams, laughed at the same stupid things boys laugh at when they still believe life will last forever. And if you'd asked me back then who I trusted most in this world, I would have said Carmine without hesitation. That's what makes this story so dangerous. Because the people who do the most damage to your life rarely arrive wearing a warning sign. They don't look dangerous. They look familiar. They look safe. They look like people you've loved for years. For nearly 20 years, I never saw what was happening. Not once. Not while it was slowly changing the way I thought, the way I spoke, the way I looked at the world. It happened so gradually that I didn't notice it. Until one day, I looked in the mirror and saw someone I barely recognized. And the most frightening part? I wasn't becoming myself. I was becoming him. It took me almost 20 years to understand that some people don't ruin your life all at once. They do it one conversation at a time. And what I learned from Carmine may save you from wasting years of your own life on the wrong people. When I was younger, I thought dangerous people were easy to recognize. I thought they were thieves, con artistes, criminals, the kind of people who made the evening news, the kind of people you cross the street to avoid. But after 82 years of watching people, I learned something uncomfortable. I was wrong, painfully wrong, because the most dangerous people you'll ever meet usually don't look dangerous at all. They're often kind, familiar, trusted. Sometimes they're the people sitting at your dinner table. Sometimes they're the people you've known for decades. And the damage they cause is far more difficult to see. They don't steal your money. They steal something much harder to replace. Your joy, your confidence, your belief that life can still be good. The worst part? You often don't realize what's happening until years have already passed. That's what happened to me. And that's why today I want to tell you about the 5 most dangerous types of people I've encountered during my lifetime. Not because they are evil, but because they slowly erode the best parts of who you are. Because there are people who don't destroy your life in a single day. They do it one conversation at a time, one complaint at a time, one disappointment at a time. And the first type is someone almost everyone feels sorry for. The person who has completely given up on life. I remember a man named Arthur Yanofsky. Arthur started coming into my shoe repair shop sometime in the late 70s. By then he was in his mid-50s. Life had been hard on him. His wife had left. His house was gone. Most of his savings had disappeared. And worst of all, he barely spoke to his children anymore. The first time he sat down in my shop, I felt nothing but sympathy. How could I not? A man can survive losing money. A man can survive losing a house. But losing his family? That leaves a wound most people never fully recover from. Every month, Arthur would come in carrying another pair of worn-out shoes. And every month he would sit in the same old wooden chair near the window. Outside, Brooklyn winters covered the sidewalks with dirty snow. Inside, the shop was dim and quiet. Just the ticking clock, the smell of leather, and Arthur's voice. At first he talked about his divorce. Then he talked about his bad luck. Then he talked about how unfair life was. Eventually that became all he talked about. Nothing good ever happened. People couldn't be trusted. The world was selfish. Hope was for fools. Every conversation sounded exactly the same, year after year. At first I listened because I cared. Then I listened because I felt guilty walking away. But something strange began happening. After Arthur left, I felt heavier, darker, a little less hopeful than I had been before. I started agreeing with things I once would have challenged. I started seeing the world through his eyes. Not all at once. Slowly. So slowly I barely noticed. That's the danger. Some people don't drag you down suddenly. They lower you inch by inch until one day you realize you're standing in the same darkness they live in. And I didn't realize I was sinking because I was sinking very slowly. That was the lesson Arthur taught me. Despair is contagious. Spend enough time around someone who has abandoned hope, and eventually you'll start abandoning pieces of your own. You cannot save someone who refuses to save themselves. And sometimes creating distance is not cruelty. Sometimes it's wisdom. Sometimes it's the kindest thing you can do for both people involved. But Arthur wasn't the most dangerous person I ever met. Not even close. Because later in life, I met someone even more dangerous than Arthur. Arthur taught me how dangerous hopelessness can be. But he wasn't the only person who changed the way I understood people. A few years later, I met someone very different. On the surface, Dominic Caruso was everything a good man should be. He volunteered in the community, helped organize neighborhood events, raised money for local projects. If you asked anyone in Brooklyn what they thought of Dominic, they'd probably tell you the same thing. That's a good man. And for a long time, I believed it too. In fact, I admired him. We worked together on several community projects over the years. One summer, we spent weeks helping rebuild an old playground that had fallen apart. The fence was rusted. The benches were broken. Kids had stopped coming there years before. Almost every evening after work, we'd meet at the park. I still remember those late afternoons. The sun sinking behind the trees. The smell of fresh cut wood. The sound of hammers striking nails. And Dominic always working harder than everyone else. At least that's what it looked like. But after a while, I noticed something. Every good deed came with a story. Every sacrifice came with a reminder. Every favor came with a receipt. Remember when I stayed late to finish the fence? Remember when I drove across town to pick up supplies? Remember when I covered for you that time? At first, it seemed harmless. It became constant. No act of kindness was ever allowed to remain a kindness. Everything had to be remembered. Everything had to be counted. Everything had to be repaid. And one day, I discovered why. Several years later, Dominic asked me for a favor. Nothing unreasonable. But at that particular moment, I simply couldn't do it. I apologized and explained the situation. I expected disappointment. Instead, I got anger. Real anger. Suddenly, 15 years of friendship felt like a courtroom trial. One by one, he began listing everything he had ever done for me. Every favor, every sacrifice, every hour, every act of generosity, as if he had been keeping records all along. I stood there stunned, not because he was angry, but because I finally understood something I should have seen years earlier. Dominic had never been giving. He had been investing. Every favor was a loan. Every kindness carried interest. Every act of generosity came attached to an invisible contract. And the moment I couldn't repay the debt exactly the way he wanted, the friendship collapsed. That evening, I walked home feeling disappointed in a way I hadn't felt in years. Not because I lost a friend, but because I realized I may never have had one. Some people help you, only so they can own you later. That was the lesson Dominic left behind. Love is not an accounting ledger. Friendship is not a business transaction. The people who truly care about you don't keep score. They don't remind you of every sacrifice. They don't wave old favors in your face whenever they need something. Because real generosity asks for nothing in return. So pay attention. Listen carefully when people talk about the good things they've done. Do they speak about them and let them go? Or do they bring them up again and again and again? That difference may tell you more about their heart than anything else. But as dangerous as Dominic was, he still taught me something valuable. At least he showed his true nature eventually. The third type of person is much harder to recognize because they can spend years convincing you that every problem in their life belongs to someone else. I learned that lesson from a man named Antonio Greco. Antonio supplied leather to my shoe repair shop for nearly a decade. When I first met him, he seemed like a hard-working businessman, friendly, confident, always talking about his plans for the future. And for a while, I enjoyed working with him. But small problems started appearing almost immediately. A shipment would arrive 3 days late. The leather quality wouldn't match what I ordered. An invoice would contain mistakes. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to create frustration. At first, I ignored it. Everyone makes mistakes. God knows I've made plenty of my own. The problem wasn't the mistakes. The problem was what happened afterward. Every single time something went wrong, Antonio had an explanation ready. The shipping company messed up. His employee misunderstood the order. The weather caused delays. A supplier let him down. The economy was struggling. Bad luck. Bad timing. Bad circumstances. There was always a reason. Always a story. Always someone else standing in the line of blame. But never Antonio. Not once in all those years did I hear him say 4 simple words. I was wrong. Not once. And after a while, I began noticing something strange. The mistakes never stopped. In fact, they became more frequent. Because why would they stop? If nothing is your fault, there's no reason to change. If every failure belongs to someone else, then every lesson belongs to someone else too. Year after year, I watched customers quietly leave. One account disappeared, then another, then another. Some left angry. Most simply walked away. They were tired. Tired of excuses. Tired of promises. Tired of hearing the same story repeated over and over. Meanwhile, Antonio remained exactly the same. Still blaming. Still explaining. Still defending himself against problems he refused to own. And that was the tragedy. Antonio didn't fail because he made mistakes. We all make mistakes. He failed because he never learned from them. One afternoon, years later, I drove past the warehouse where his company used to operate. The building was empty. The sign was gone. The parking lot sat silent beneath a gray winter sky. I remember sitting there for a moment, staring at that abandoned building. And I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, sadness. Because I knew exactly what had happened. The business didn't collapse in a single day. It collapsed one excuse at a time. One refusal at a time. One missed opportunity to say, I was wrong, at a time. That's when I understood something I have never forgotten. A person who cannot say, I was wrong, will eventually lose everything that could have been made right. Their relationships, their opportunities, their reputation, sometimes even their future. Because growth begins where excuses end, and responsibility is the price every mature person must pay. So pay attention when someone makes a mistake. Don't watch the mistake. Watch what happens after the mistake. Do they apologize? Do they learn? Do they try to improve? Or do they immediately begin searching for someone else to blame? That answer will tell you more about their character than years of conversation ever could. And yet, even Antonio wasn't the most dangerous person I encountered. Because the next type of person doesn't just avoid responsibility. They lose something even more important. Their connection to the future itself. And that's when I came to understand something even more unsettling. The most dangerous people aren't always the angry ones. They aren't always the dishonest ones. And they certainly aren't always the ones society warns you about. Sometimes they're people who have simply lost their connection to life. And sometimes there are people who seem absolutely perfect. I saw both. The first was a young man named Danny Marchetti. I remember Danny when he was full of energy. He had a steady job, a beautiful girlfriend, plans for the future, the kind of young man who looked like he had his whole life ahead of him. Then, one by one, everything disappeared. He lost his job. The relationship ended. His family pushed him away after a series of arguments that should have been repaired but never were. And something inside him broke. You could see it in his eyes. That dangerous emptiness. That feeling of having nowhere left to go. Nothing left to protect. Nothing left to lose. After that, Danny changed. He started taking risks that made no sense. Picking fights. Burning bridges. Making decisions that hurt him and everyone around him. Not because he was evil. Because he stopped caring. And when a person stops caring about tomorrow, tomorrow loses its power over them. The last time I heard about Danny, he was sitting in a prison cell at 25 years old. Not because he was born bad, because he had become untethered from everything that once gave his life meaning. But Danny wasn't the person who frightened me the most. That distinction belongs to a man I'll call Gerald. Gerald was the opposite of Danny in every possible way. Polite, respectable, successful, the kind of man everyone trusted immediately. He smiled often, spoke gently, always seemed calm. If you met him at church or at a neighborhood gathering, you would probably admire him. I know I did. Then one day, his wife came into my shop alone. She was wearing long sleeves in the middle of July. Her eyes looked exhausted. When I handed her a pair of shoes, she flinched. Just slightly, but enough. After that, I started paying attention. The jokes Gerald made about her. The subtle criticism hidden inside compliments. The way she seemed to shrink whenever he entered a room. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic. Just small signs. Tiny cracks in a perfect mask. And that was when I finally understood what all these people had in common. Danny, Gerald, Arthur, Dominic, Antonio. None of them looked dangerous in the beginning. The danger wasn't what they did. The danger was what happened to the people around them. They stole hope. They weakened confidence. They slowly convinced others to accept less from life. Less joy, less peace, less self-respect. Until one day, people forgot who they were supposed to be. That's the real danger. The most dangerous person isn't the one who makes you afraid. The most dangerous person is the one who turns you into a worse version of yourself. The one who slowly changes the way you think, the way you feel, the way you see your own worth. So pay attention, not just to how people treat you. Pay attention to who you become after spending time with them. Because the people closest to you are always shaping you. The only question is whether they're shaping you into someone stronger or someone smaller. And when I look back on all these years, all these people, and all these mistakes, I realize the lessons were never really about them. They were about what happens to us when we stop paying attention. Arthur taught me that hope is one of the most valuable things a person possesses. Once you lose it, everything else becomes harder to hold on to. Dominic taught me that love was never meant to be a ledger. The people who truly care about you don't keep receipts. They don't turn kindness into debt. Antonio taught me that maturity begins with 4 simple words: I was wrong. And the people who can never say those words often spend their lives repeating the same mistakes. Danny showed me something equally important. The ties that bind us to family, purpose, responsibility, and tomorrow are not burdens. They're anchors. Sometimes they're the only things keeping us from drifting into darkness. And Gerald reminded me that not every danger announces itself. Sometimes your instincts notice something long before your mind can explain it. Sometimes that quiet voice inside you is trying to protect you. So listen, because all 5 of these people left me with the same lesson. Protect your hope. Protect your character. Protect your sense of self. Not everyone deserves access to those things. And once they're damaged, they can take years to rebuild. As the day comes to an end here in my little shoe shop, I often find myself thinking about Carmine. The sun has almost disappeared. The shadows stretch across the floor. The old clock on the wall keeps ticking. And in moments like that, I remember the last time I saw him. He was sitting alone. No family. No friends. No one waiting for him. No one checking on him. Just a man and the bitterness he had fed for most of his life. The sad truth is that Carmine wasn't born that way. None of these people were. Life hurt them. Disappointment changed them. And little by little, they allowed their wounds to become their identity. That's what makes this story so important. The person you should be most careful of is not the person who can hurt you. It's the person who can change you. The person who slowly convinces you to think smaller, dream less, trust less, hope less. Because once that happens, you begin losing pieces of yourself without even noticing. And at my age, I've come to understand something simple but profound. Protecting your soul is every bit as important as protecting your heart. Both can be broken. Both can heal. But both deserve your attention. So now I'd like to hear from you. Which of these 5 types of people have you encountered in your own life? Tell me your story in the comments below. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message today, please share this video with them. Finally, if you enjoy these honest conversations about life, aging, wisdom, and the lessons time teaches all of us, consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you for spending these moments with me. And until our next conversation, take care of your heart, your mind, and the people you allow close to both.